All right, guys, we're live. It's Justin Stenstrom from EliteLifeNutrition.com. And my guest today is Eduardo Briceño, the author of the new book, The Performance Paradox. Eduardo, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Justin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm running a little bit behind today, so we're going to kind of speed things up and dive into the takeaways for the episode. I want to make sure, I know you got a hard stop and stuff. I got some things to do as well. But I want to make sure our listeners get as much from this interview as possible. So I'm going to stay away so much from some of the other things I might ask in the past of like, your background and this and that, because I'm sure listeners can find that. But I want to dive more into the actionable takeaways and really what the performance paradox is all about. I know, I'll just say this real quick. I know that you have done some work with Carol Dweck, the famous author of, was it Mindset? That's the book, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, like one of the biggest self-help books of all time, blew up years ago. I mean, I actually read this long, long time ago. Kind of forget some of the. It's probably something I have to go back to, honestly. But I forget a lot of the takeaways, but I just know it was a groundbreaking book, and some of the things you've been doing lately, I'm sure are based off of that. But, anyways, I'll let you do some of the explaining on what the performance paradox is really about, and kind of if that concept is related to the mindset concept that Dweck put out.
absolutely. I started working with Carol Dweck in 2007. She's been my mentor ever since. And she discovered in the 1980s, and she coined this term growth mindset, which is the belief that we can change, that our abilities and our qualities are malleable, that we can develop. So if we think that some people are smart and others aren't, and that intelligence is fixed, that would be the opposite of a fixed mindset. It's called growth mindset. It's called a fixed mindset. Or if we think, great athletes are great athletes because they're natural athletes, that would be a fixed mindset or natural leadership, as opposed to everybody can become a better leader or a better athlete. That would be a growth mindset. And so we've done a lot of work in how we all are in a mix. We all have and are in a fixed mindset some of the time about certain abilities, about certain people, maybe sometimes about ourselves, maybe sometimes about others. And whenever we're in a fixed mindset, we create a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if we believe we can't change, then we don't do anything to change. And therefore we don't improve, because in order to improve, we have to change. Same thing, if we believe that somebody else can't change, we label them, we don't share information they can learn from, so they don't know there's an opportunity to improve, and they don't improve as a result. So we create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So growth mindset is really, really powerful. But sometimes people see it as a silver bullet, as, if you just develop this belief, then you're a great learner. And what we've discovered is that a growth mindset is really powerful, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. In addition to believing that you can change, you also need to know how to change, how to improve. And that's where the performance paradox comes in, because what's counterintuitive is that if we focus only on performing, which is what a lot of us are doing, then we harm our performance. Our performance drops if we're only worried about getting things done as best as we know how, trying to minimize mistakes. To increase our performance, we need to not just worry about getting things done, but also be deliberate about improvement, which means experimenting, trying new things, soliciting feedback, thinking about our mistakes and talking about our mistakes. And those are different than just worrying about getting things done.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I guess the first question, there's a lot that's going to follow up, but I think the first question that just kind of comes to mind off of what you initially said is growth mindset. I totally believe in 100%. I hate the fixed mindset that I think some people, or a good amount of people, unfortunately have, especially in America these days. But I do think that, so where does it come into play though? Like your genes, your genetics, your innate inherent ability, God-given, ability to do a particular thing. Where does that come into play? And in your view of growth mindset, can growth mindset overcome all these things given the right abilities to learn and to improve? Or is there a ceiling on some specific areas of one's life?
Well, we're all in, if we think about any one ability, what we can do is a mix of nature and nurture, is a mix of our genes and how much we have developed that ability. And even our genes change over our lifetime. They can get activated or not. And so a growth mindset doesn't mean that everybody starts at the same point. It means that everybody can improve. So even if you are a great leader, you can get better. That's a growth mindset, as opposed to I'm a great leader and I can't get better. That's a fixed mindset. Um, and and so also, so Satya Nadella is the CEO of Microsoft, and he's done a great job at fostering a growth mindset culture there. So one of the things that he says is that potential is nurtured, not predetermined. So you can't look at somebody or yourself and say, here's my ceiling, because we don't know what the ceiling is until we go through the process and work to improve. And we know we can always get better. We don't know, if there's a ceiling or what the ceiling is. We just, there's a lot of people that were thought of to never be, they're never going to be great at something, and then they became one of the best in the world. And so we just we need to think about, like, what are we interested in, what do we want to become great at, and then just go through the process.
Okay, so if I understand you, you're saying that there is limits in obviously certain areas. Like, if I'm 5'8", I'm not going to play in the NBA, most likely, no matter how much practicing I do. However, there's not a limit to how much you can improve in your ability to necessarily, be your best. Like, people have caps on what they think they do, and in your philosophy, oftentimes they can go way beyond those caps. Is that a good kind of assessment?
Yeah, you can always get better. No matter how good you are, you can always get better. Whether you can play in the NBA or not, like, nobody knows. If you're short, you probably, like, we would think a lot that would be really hard, but I wouldn't say that it's impossible. I mean, there are people who've done amazing things that have seen the impossible before that. But also, I would say that it's not like a growth mindset. I'm not in a growth mindset about everything. I'm in a fixed mindset about some things. Like, I don't believe that I can read a book while listening to another audiobook. That's a fixed mindset. I believe I can get better at that. And so we just need to become more aware of what are fixed mindsets, and then think critically about them and think about, is there some scientific research behind this? Is this fixed mindset true? Do I believe that people actually can't improve at these things? Because a lot of our fixed mindsets are just based on assumptions that we've learned, but that are not actually true.
Okay, so actually there is a place for fixed mindsets, you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, I believe I can't become substantially taller, once I'm an adult. That might be true. I might be wrong. Anytime we're in a fixed mindset, we might be wrong. But it is what I believe. I believe that I can't, change my height, and that's a fixed mindset.
Yeah, and it's actually more productive to live that way as opposed to thinking you're in a growth mindset and you're, 30 years old and you're not going to grow tall. Like, if you always have that growth mindset, it can actually work against you because you're putting your energy in the wrong place.
Right. You can actually, like, when I was a kid, I remember I knew that the brain was very malleable, and I thought that if I could think about two things at the same time, I would be so productive throughout my life. And I tried to train myself at having two trains of thoughts at the same time, or listening to something while I was reflecting on something else. And I just exhausted myself. I failed and failed and failed. And then I developed a fixed mindset belief. I developed the belief that I can't think about two things at the same time. And I feel that's helpful, because then if I want to become more effective, then I don't try that strategy. I try a different strategy.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think though that the brain is so complex and so interesting that neuroscientists and all these guys now are discovering more and more things that we previously thought were kind of impossible, especially with like neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to constantly rewire itself. And even people with like serious brain damage can like recover, even if they can't recover tissue in certain areas of the brain, they can recover function simply by the rewiring of it, which is pretty incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah. The brain is incredibly malleable, for sure.
Yeah. So when it comes to like, growing taller, maybe that's at this point in time, anyways, science hasn't gotten that, but that's impossible at this point in time. But in certain other areas, like as a kid, maybe as a kid that was impossible, but now they're discovering new techniques, or perhaps maybe, the inclusion of technology will allow the brain to do that in a few years, like the Neuralink type of
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah, anytime we're in a fixed mindset, we might be wrong. Like you're saying, I
Yeah.
mean, Messi, an amazing soccer player, he did certain things to become a little taller because he was short, and so he probably got a little taller as a result of that. And as you say, we might find new technologies or new techniques to change things that we previously thought were not changeable.
Yeah. You mentioned, was it the CEO or the founder of Microsoft? 'Cause I thought Bill Gates is the founder of Microsoft. Was it
Yeah,
CEO?
it's the current CEO, Satya Nadella,
Okay, you
not the
mentioned
founder.
him. I know you also talk about in the book examples of like Tom Brady, Serena Williams. What do we learn from these people, these high level Beyonce, I think is another person, these high level achievers about the paradox of performance?
Well, when we see a fantastic, skilled performer like Tom Brady or Beyonce, we only see their performance zone. We only see when they are doing the thing they know how to do really well, and they're putting the best foot forward, trying to minimize mistakes. And the impression that we can get from that is that the reason they become so good at what they do is because they spend a lot of hours doing that thing. So if you are a quarterback, it's because Tom Brady played a lot of, football games that he became so good. But actually, that's not how these people improve. It's not by doing what we see, it's by doing something very different from what we see. So, for example, in the NFL, when quarterbacks are working to improve, one of the things they do is they have virtual reality headsets where they play videos of plays with their coach, looking at what the quarterback's doing, the decisions they're making. So they'll do a play just that is simulated, and then they'll talk about the play, and they'll look at the play in slow motion, and they'll see, like, what were you thinking here, what did you see. And that's a very different activity than just playing football. And so the key is that the people who become fantastic at what they do something very different from performing. They do other different activities that are about improvement. So if Beyonce, for example, we see that her on stage, like, doing amazing things, but after each show, she will review video of the show, and she will make notes about what could be improved. She shares those notes with her team, and then the next day they have meetings and they talk about, hey, what are we going to change for the next performance? And that's different than just showing up and doing lots of shows.
Yeah, that's incredible actually. It's a very simple concept, but it's a real enlightening one. How can people, just regular people have regular jobs? What can they do if they're not getting filmed, on a nationally televised screen or in a major conference with a concert with 50,000 people? Like, how do they take that same concept but apply it in their own lives?
Right. So most of us are going about most of our work in life just worried about performing, just getting the job done. And that gets us stagnant. And so, but when we look at somebody like Tom Brady or Beyonce, they're performing a very low percentage of hours of the week. So they have the privilege of devoting hours each day to only improvement, which a lot of us is not practical for us. We have a lot to do. And so for most of us, the greatest opportunity is to shift the way we do things so that we do them not only with one objective of getting things done, but with two objectives of getting things done while improving at the same time. And so that means we need to first identify what is one thing that I am working to improve in myself. Like, if I ask yourself, like any of the listeners, do you know what you're working to improve in yourself right now? If the answer is I don't know, then that's a place to start, right? To think about, what do I want to get better at? Second, like, how are you going to remind yourself of that every day? Like, I think just reminding ourselves every morning of, here's the thing that I'm working to improve, and here's the learning strategy that I'm using to improve at that goes a huge way, because it primes the growth mindset, it primes the learning zone. And so depending on what skill we want to improve at, we might use different strategies. But a very powerful strategy for a lot of us is just soliciting feedback often from a lot of people, just every day, just soliciting feedback. Hey, what can I do better? What worked well? What was helpful? What was not helpful? Because when we uncover information from other people, we learn, the effect of our actions and what's helpful, and how we affect others. That's one. Experimenting. So one thing is, if we don't change, we can't improve. and often we are doing today things in the same way than we did yesterday or last month. So there's no way we're going to improve that way. So we have to be changing in order to have the option to improve. And then we can see, like, are these changes actually leading to things to improvement or not? So we can regularly reflect on that. Hey, what am I working to improve? What strategy am I using? Am I actually seeing progress? Do I want to try a different strategy? What do I want to work on next? So those are some things that people can do, but there's a lot of strategies. Examining mistakes, experimenting. There's deliberate practice. There's thinking about how we are building our integrated knowledge and skills, so that we're expanding our knowledge. That makes us more capable. There's a lot of things we can do as individuals and then as teams and organizations as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things there. What did you say deliberate practice? What's that? What's that look like?
Yeah, deliberate practice is what people like Tom Brady or Beyonce engage in, which is when I was growing up, I would practice the guitar, quote, practice. I thought I was practicing. But the way I would do that is just kind of play the songs that I liked. And that research shows that that's not a great way to improve at anything, because you're just performing. And so when we are just performing, we do get better when we're really bad, when we're novices. Like if I don't know anything about guitars and I start trying to play it, I'll get a little better at the beginning, but then I'll stagnate. And so to get better beyond proficiency and to get to world class, we have to engage in what's called deliberate practice, which is first you identify a sub-skill, a very specific sub-skill that you're working on. So it might be a particular finger movement in a particular part of the song, and you try it. Just that thing, not the whole thing, just that thing. You might try it a little slowly at first and see how it sounds. And from the sound, you get feedback. And based on that feedback, you make adjustments and you try again. So you're trying and trying and trying, getting feedback between each repetition and making adjustments based on that feedback. Ideally, with the guidance of a teacher or a coach that knows how to guide people to learn the guitar or football or singing or anything else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you end up getting good at guitar?
No, I never. I just dropped it. I was working. I didn't learn about deliberate practice until I was well into adulthood, and it wasn't a goal for me to get better at music. At some point, at some point I actually would love to compose music. I think I would enjoy that. And so I might work on that when work slows down, a couple decades.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple decades from now. It's funny though, because I'm in the same boat. Like I learned guitar as a kid and never really got good at it. Can play the basic notes, an easy song, but never mastered it like I wanted to. But I'd like to try a different approach. And it was all self-taught too. If I had a real coach, a real guy telling me how to do it, teacher, that with these newfound skills like deliberate practice, I feel like I could make some real ground. But
Me too. Yeah. And the thing is, so we need to realize that we can improve, and also like what are effective strategies to improve. And then we know that that's an option. Like I know I could get better at the guitar. You could get better at the guitar, and you could get better at lots of other things. That doesn't mean we have to work to get better at all those things. We can make choices. Here's what I care about. This is what I want to work on. It doesn't mean we need to work at everything.
yeah, it's a good thing. And, like you too, I've been super busy with work. There's like a million things I want to do with the work stuff. And it's like, all right, it's always like when I get a little bit more, then I'll have some time and I want to learn Spanish fluently. I know a little bit of it. I should be fluent by now, but I'm not. But that's another thing too. I'm not like language doesn't come to me easy. So I have to spend a lot of time doing that. And I have to really prioritize. All right, do I really need that right now? No, but I would like it at some point. So yeah,
Yeah, totally.
it's about prioritizing what's really important. Serena
Yeah, and right
Williams.
now we have some tools that are great that people used to have it before. Like Duolingo is a great app, and there's other
Yeah,
apps that just make those are things that are available to us that didn't used to be available to prior generations, and that's really exciting too.
yeah. There's some of the more technology, like we mentioned before, of like helping us really break through. Serena Williams. I'm actually a big fan of her. She's the GOAT of tennis. Kind of like Tom Brady. A lot of people consider him the GOAT of NFL. Has she stuck out in any specific way other than the deliberate practice of like being at that high? Like, you got like Michael Jordan, Serena Williams, Tom Brady. She's really like light years above even elite world class players because she's in her own category of being probably the best ever in that sport. Is there something that she did that you mentioned her in the book? Is there something she did in particular though you can think of?
Yeah, and I agree. She's definitely a goat. Um, uh, One thing that was interesting and different about her and her sister Venus is that when they were growing up, and you can see this in the movie King Richard is
Yeah.
about this. It's a documentary and movie about them, and Richard was their father. Um, One thing that was different about what they did is all the other top tennis players who were kind of adolescents or kids, they would play a lot of tournaments in juniors tournaments. And what their dad did was he took them out of those tournaments, and they didn't play tournaments for years before they became professional. And so one thing that he understood and that they came to understand is that to become great at tennis, you don't need to even play matches. You don't even need to play tournaments, right? Because the tournament is a performance zone. And how you improve is not the performance zone, it's the learning zone. So they had more time. Part of the reason they did that is because they wanted to also devote more time to school and to just learning from school. But they also had more time for learning tennis. And so they realized, even if you play no tournaments, like you can become world class. And so they became professionals, without spending much time playing or any time for years playing juniors.
It's pretty cool. It's actually a very counterintuitive concept too, but it falls right along with what you just said about playing guitar. You pick out specific little things and master those things, and then by the end of it, a couple of years later, you can put the whole thing together and be beating everybody. If in terms of guitar, you become a great guitarist, or in terms of tennis, you become the best tennis player probably that ever lived.
Yeah, and of course that there's something to be gained from playing games and in high stakes, high stress situations. So when Venus, and this is in the movie too, when she played her first tournament, she was doing really well. She was winning against Arantxa Sanchez, which is was the best woman at the time. And Arantxa Sanchez did something to mess with her psychology, and she collapsed in that game. And she didn't have enough experience, playing tournaments, but pretty quickly she learned those things from playing tournaments, and she had the most important hard to develop skills. Another example is a drummer. Her name is Nandi Bushell. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she was a 10-year-old drummer who tweeted to the leader of the Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl, and she said, "Hey, I want to do a drum battle with you." And he's like, "Well," he just kind of chuckled, but he engaged with her, and she was fantastic. So they went back and forth. He would record himself playing the drums, and then she would learn the piece, even emulate his own kind of facial expressions. It was really fun. They did this all over Twitter, so it was really fun to see the videos. And then she ended up playing with the Foo Fighters when she was 11. And so she had very little experience, but she had great expertise, because the way you build experience is through the performance zone, but the way you build expertise is through the learning zone. And so she was able to do deliberate practice as a kid, even though she'd never played on stage until she start playing with the Foo Fighters, pretty much.
That's wild. That's crazy. Um, so along those lines, have you discovered, Serena, these tennis players are super young too. Have you discovered that it's easier to get to master a new skill or concept when you're younger as opposed to when you're older, or is it generally the same type of thing?
Well, it definitely helps to start young on anything. Um, our brain is malleable throughout life, but it is most malleable when we are kids, especially when we're younger than in our mid 20s. It is still there's great neuroplasticity beyond our 20s, but the neuroplasticity that we can drive beyond our 20s is mainly we can drive it through making mistakes, through when the brain makes a prediction that turns out to be wrong. There's neurotransmitters that are triggered that make the brain rewire. And so that's why, for example, in deliberate practice, you're trying something hard where you're going to be failing, you're going to be making mistakes, you're going to be getting information from that. For example, your serve might go too much to the right because you might be in deliberate practice, you might be trying to put your serve even like faster than you usually would, or in a very specific spot. And so you're going to go deviate a little bit from that, and you're going to get feedback from that and adjust. When you're really young, you can learn a lot more from experience. And so, and the people who become fantastic what they do, they often, start young, so there's benefit to that. But you can always improve throughout life. And there's also benefit to breadth. So whether with being young or older, when we have had different experiences and engaged in different things, not just in one thing, then we can become better at that one thing or in various things.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm going to ask you about the power of mistakes in a moment. But well, actually, we'll dive in that because you did kind of touch on it a little bit. I guess there's four kinds of mistakes, and we can actually like improve a lot faster when we make these mistakes. Is that a little bit of what you're hinting at?
Well, mistakes, as we just said, like they're super, super important and helpful to improvement. They're critical to improvement. But mistakes also decrease performance. Like if you look at Serena Williams and why she wins so much, it's, when she's making few mistakes on the court, that's when she's on fire and she wins more, right? And so sometimes we have this tension, this thing that we haven't fully resolved between, are mistakes good or are they bad? And so I kind of talk about four different kinds of mistakes so that we can really like resolve that tension. So first, there's this stretch mistakes. Those are the mistakes that we make in our learning zone. So when we are in a low stake situation where I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to work on my top spin serve. I'm going to try to put it into this corner. And so most likely I'm not going to go right on the corner. So that means that I'm going to be making mistakes, and I'm going to learn from those mistakes. We want to be making a lot of stretch mistakes because that's how we learn. That's how we get better. But we don't want to do that in a high stakes situation. Like we don't want to be trying to do that in a championship final, right? Second is the high stakes mistakes, which are the mistakes that we want to try to avoid. So when we're with a very important client, or we are basically quote on stage and and there's something that a mistake would have significant consequences, then we want to try to play it safe, do what we think works, try to minimize mistakes. Third, there's the sloppy mistakes, which are the mistakes we make that we should have known better. We've learned this lesson before, and often either these can be like not important, and they might be even things to laugh, and just bring joy and humor into our lives. I spill something on myself, like I might even take a picture and send it to my friends so they can laugh too. But sometimes sloppy mistakes can have significant consequences. So we can always, anytime we make a mistake, we can reflect and think about what led to this mistake and what could I do to prevent it in the future. Because often, whether it's in work or otherwise, say that we have a customer and we do something that doesn't go well with that customer. Sometimes we do fix a mistake by fixing the issue for the one customer, but the step that we sometimes forget is we don't think about how can I change my process or my systems or my tools so that it doesn't recur with other customers, right? So what's the root cause? And then finally, the aha moment mistakes, which are when we do something as we intended, but then we realize it was the wrong thing to do. And those are precious mistakes. But when they happen, we need to kind of pay attention to them and derive the lessons from them. But it's harder to proactively elicit them. Though what we can do to try to elicit more of them is to just solicit feedback frequently.
Yeah, and
so these are different kinds of mistakes that we can think about for ourselves. And the key is we want to make more stretch mistakes. We want to take on challenges that are beyond what we know, that are going to mean that we're not going to do those things flawlessly. We're going to learn from them. That's the key. That's the thing that we can do proactively, is try to make more stretch mistakes by doing things that are challenging. But the other thing that I would mention is we got to be careful about weaponizing mistakes. Like if we collaborate with others in our teams, what we see as a sloppy mistake, somebody else might see as a stretch mistake or as an aha moment mistake. So we want to approach, when other people make mistakes, we want to approach that with curiosity, so that we are making it safe for us to talk about mistakes and what we can learn from them. Because if it's not safe, if they feel like they're going to be put down if they make a mistake, then they're going to be trying to minimize mistakes all the time. That the only way to do that is to be in the performance zone all the time. So it's going to lead to stagnation,
Yeah, and burnout, and
burnout. Yeah.
people just not getting what they want, as in terms of results. You mentioned curiosity a second ago too. How important is the having like I think it's called childhood or childlike curiosity you mentioned in your book. How important is that in terms of performance?
Well, curiosity helps us explore and discover, ask questions and listen better. So that's super important and powerful for us to expand our understanding of other people's preferences, other people's experiences, how we can better collaborate with them, to expand our horizons. Like if I am an expert in accounting, if I'm curious about other things, as I discover those other things, I might like create innovative ideas that also apply to accounting. So there's a ton of value to curiosity. And I think a lot of us were very, very curious as young kids. And I think a lot of our curiosity was kind of killed by school, because when we get to school, we're told to sit in a chair and we're talked at. And that's, I think taught like a lot of boring things that are irrelevant. And so, our curiosity is extinguished. But curiosity brings a lot of joy and just makes life a lot fuller as we're discovering and developing deeper relationship with each other, and we can reconnect with that.
Yeah. And how, like, just real quickly, how would you change some things in terms of the schooling in, I guess, America? Because that's really the only one I'm familiar with. But what would you tweak, like the biggest thing you would tweak in terms of, childhood education?
Well, I mean, if I'm talking about a tweak, I would say that something that's relatively easy to tweak. Um, a lot of kids are a lot of the student work, most of the student work gets a number or a grade on it. Like it gets assessed by how close to perfection you did that work. And the message that sends to kids is that school is a performance zone, right? It's sending the message that what we want kids to be doing all day, every day, is to do the things they already know how to do, because that's the only way that to get 100 on everything they do. As opposed to, we want school to be mostly a learning zone, and every once in a while we take a test to see whether we've learned those skills. And to do that, we want to, like, if a kid does a piece of work in the learning zone and they get 100, the conclusion should be that they were working on the wrong thing. Serena Williams doesn't like just keep doing the same thing that she already knows how to do. She does the next level of challenge. And so we need to be working on things that we don't know how to do yet, which means we're going to be making mistakes, and we need to be talking about those mistakes, learning from those mistakes, getting feedback on the work itself and how it can improve, as opposed to, did you get it all right? And so I don't know about you, but when I went to school, when we were working on a problem, the teacher would just try to get somebody who knew how to do the problem. Hey, do you know how to do the problem, Justin? Come up to the front of the classroom and explain how to do it. And if Justin got it right, then that's wonderful. Now let's go to the next problem. As opposed to, hey, like, that's cool, that's how you do it. Now, who did it wrong? What mistake did you make? Let's look at that mistake and think about what we can learn from it. Because otherwise there's just a lot of people who are left confused. They're not sure what they did wrong. We're not actually learning from the mistakes. So that's one tweak. A big thing would be to have students drive their learning, meaning start with what each student is interested in learning about, and kind of supporting that exploration, so that they can become lifelong learners and develop the skill of being motivated and effective learners who are interested in things, as opposed to, here, I'm going to tell you what you're going to learn today.
Yeah, I agree. I like those tweaks. I personally think too, somewhat along those lines of going with what the child wants, as opposed to sticking 30 kids in a class and then 1,000 kids in the grade into a bunch of, putting them into a bunch of boxes in which they hate, and they're learning things that one year out the other, and then 5 years after they graduate, they have no idea what they learned. They forget, rather than doing that, I like the idea of putting kids into different programs that they actually do enjoy. Like, not everyone's going to be good at math. Not everyone's going to be good at science. Not everyone's going to be, a literary scholar. But trying to put everybody in those boxes, I think, is a bad idea, as opposed to maybe setting people up with trades or doing, different skills that they can actually have value in 5, 10 years when they graduate, and then have like a really good job that makes a ton of money that actually makes them happy because they enjoy doing it, rather than a bunch of kids who graduate 5, 10 years from now who are, working at McDonald's because they flunked out of school. Or maybe they did graduate, but they didn't learn a damn thing. So it's like going along with like what actually inherently interests people that they're curious about, and motivating them and to do more of those things, as opposed to just putting everybody in that, black and white box. I think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that choice is a really powerful thing when we have give students choice. And I think there's also something to be said about the teacher as a guide, and also to inspire, right? To inspire curiosity and challenge. Because, if I'm uncomfortable, like I am a public speaker right now. When I was growing up, I was extremely, extremely introverted.
Yeah.
And I wish that teachers had given me choice, but also pushed me a little bit to, hey, like, we part of what we do in school is we try new things, and things that we're bad at, and just to like check it out and test it, um and not as a forced thing, but like, here's something we value, to try different things that we haven't done before.
Absolutely. A great teacher is a motivator and a guide, and also pushes you in the right way. Not too much to make you shut down, but just enough to propel you into maybe doing something you wouldn't necessarily want to do, or maybe is shy to do. I think it's a
Yeah.
great idea. I know we got just a few minutes, but I want to just follow up on one other thing. So the chronic performance trap, which is essentially, the main takeaway of the book. But why does doing more often prevent you from getting more done? Like, a lot of people think that they're getting, especially entrepreneurs, they think they're at home and they're doing, a million things a day. But, fast forward 6 months, a year later, the totality of what they've done doesn't really add up. And same, a lot of people in general, 9 to 5 jobs, whatever, but I'm thinking entrepreneurs specifically. But like, why does doing more actually kind of hurt you and stop your progress and what you're overall trying to do?
Well, like, if it can, right? It depends. So if you're, say you're a salesperson, right, and you are, the last week of the quarter, you have a quota of how much you are expected to sell for this quarter. You're approaching that. You're almost there. Um, it might be reasonable to focus on just the performance zone for that last week of the quarter to make over quota. Like, there's usually like a bonus that comes if you make quota, and so in that week you might do as much as possible, quote. So you might just focus on making calls, trying to sell. That's performance. But if we approach every week like that, then we're gonna stay at the same level of effectiveness, as opposed to when the next quarter comes around, we might think about, are there some other products that these customers might be interested in, so that each sale I could sell two products instead of one? Or can I learn more about what my customer actually cares about, so that I can better communicate and better influence them during those calls? And that might involve some experimentation, soliciting some feedback, maybe observing another salesperson. And so just making as many sales calls as possible is the performance zone that maximizes performance for the short term, but it keeps you at the same level of effectiveness going forward, as opposed to finding ways to work smarter and get more results done in less time.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So going back to the performance zone, and then the what's it called again? Deliberate.
Well, the performance zone, and the learning zone is when you go beyond the known. And in the learning zone, you can engage in a lot of different learning strategies, like deliberate practice is one of them, or
Yeah.
soliciting feedback, or experimentation. There's lots of learning zone strategies depending on the different skills.
Okay. Perfect. And all right, man, it's been a fantastic interview. I really do appreciate it, Eduardo. I just want you to leave one more send off takeaway message for the Elite Life audience, and then a place our listeners can check out your book and your work.
Sure. So I would say that incorporating our learning zone into our lives, just like in terms of health habits, and I've had kind of I suffer from a repetitive strain injury, and I had to like learn about nutrition and about stretching and cardio and all kinds of things. But in developing a different lifestyle was about developing new habits. Similarly, in getting unstuck from chronic performance is about building new habits and systems to engage in the learning zone as we get things done. So it's in a similar way. And the benefit of that, not only is it that we perform better and we get more results, but also the process itself, the process of living is just more joyful, right? We explore more, we discover more, we develop more relationship with each other, like deeper relationships. We also experience less anxiety and depression, because when the world is complex and is fast changing, and when we are stuck in chronic performance, when something changes, we don't have a solution, and we feel like, oh my God, I'm going to be left behind, or like, I don't know how to deal with this. But when we have habituated the learning zone, we take change as a given, and we know that we can figure things out and adjust and evolve along the way. So we experience less anxiety and depression as a result of that. So not only does the learning zone improve the destination, but it also improves the journey. In terms of how to find me, I mean, if people want to learn more deeply about all that we've been talking about today, my book is called The Performance Paradox: Turning the Power of Mindset into Action. It was selected as a must-read by the Next Big Idea Club, which is curated by Susan Cain, Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, and Dan Pink. I'm super excited about that. And my website is briceño.com. I have a free download there on 5 strategies to develop a growth mindset. And I have a monthly newsletter if people want to sign up. Oh, and I'm active on LinkedIn if people want to connect there.
Awesome. Guys, make sure you check him out. Eduardo, The Performance Paradox just came out. Awesome book. I'm going to read through it myself to learn even more, because this was a fascinating interview. Thanks again, man, for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Justin. Take care.